Great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for being here. And let's start off with the Fed. And the Fed keeps talking about inflation, how they have it under control. They don't want inflation to rise. And they're saying that we really don't have any inflation in the economy. From your viewpoint and from all your research and everything you've been looking at, is the Fed right? We have no inflation in the economy whatsoever, and they're just hoping to get it one day?
Sorry to start off laughing, but I think that anyone who is listening to this, who transacts in dollars, could vouch for the fact that we are seeing inflation everywhere. So no, there's a big problem ahead. There's no doubt about it. The Fed, as we all know, has been on a money printing binge, add 2 digits to a screen now. Off the Richter scale for a decade, and we're going to run into an issue where we have all of these extra bills in whatever form they're in, chasing the same amount of goods at one point, and we're in for a wallop here. The Fed can't stop this from happening. It's an impossibility, and I think they realize that. So again, what do we know about the Fed? They never get anything right. And I'm not just pulling that out of a hat. I want people to do their own research. And they're going to mess this up too. When they instituted, buying everything that they possibly could to keep everything propped up, they never had an exit plan. They never thought about how this would unwind. And so I think they've really pushed themselves into a spot that they can't get out of at this point. And it just goes back to how this is going to end. And it's going to end very badly at one point. Don't know when, don't honestly care when, just know it's going to happen. It's gone on way longer than I think anyone would have expected it to go. And these are just cycles, these boom and bust cycles. They last about 10 years or so. It's been about that long since the last meltdown. And we're due. There's no doubt about it. And this issue with bonds lately is rattling the markets. But I think there's an extraordinary effort right now by the Federal Reserve, by the banks, to keep rates suppressed, despite the fact that we keep hearing that they want to raise rates. Every time rates go up, what do? They start getting into the bond market and buying them up, push the rates lower. Now it seems like the 10-year being at 3% is a line in the sand. We got over that, and stocks started to suffer. Now today was epic. They got in there and they bought those bonds like they were the last ones to ever be had in the history of the world. And this did push the 10-year DAC back below 3%, and we had a nice rally on Wall Street. So let's think about that. We have a big rally in the bond market and a big rally in the stock market at the same time. It's kind of interesting. I have a live chart of the bond market on my website, traderschoice.net. And if anyone was paying attention to that today, they could have watched in real time how this worked out. When the Fed, that's who it is, and the banks were buying up those bonds, pushing the yields lower, what did that do? That caused stocks to rise. And then as soon as the bonds stopped being bought, stocks started to fall. Then they got in there and started buying more. Stocks went higher. This is what they've done here. And in their efforts to keep this mechanism going, this charade, they've managed to push the yield curve nearly flat. And that is a big problem moving forward here. The last two times we've seen this, both ended up in catastrophes for the financial markets. 2008 and the time before that was the dot-com bubble, where we had valuations where they are and a yield curve which is almost non-existent. So there's problems coming down the pike, no doubt about it.
So a flattening or inverted yield curve, is that a signal for a recession?
Well, generally, yeah, that's been the case when we've seen a yield curve flatten out like this. That means people don't want to be borrowing for the long term like that. Now, we've seen this again at the top of the last two bubbles, exactly the same thing. So they can tell us, our politicians can tell us all they want. but the evidence is everywhere. I don't know about where you live, but where I live, stores are closing all over the place. There's malls that are empty. It's an incredible thing to see. But they're telling us, they're trying to convince us that everything is just great. No, it's not just great. We've again, we don't learn from the past, and it's not just a matter of learning. This is the cycle that is deliberately run by the banks, by the Federal Reserve. This is how they create wealth on a grand scale by inflating and then deflating bubbles. That's all they do. The Fed is a deliberate serial bubble blower, and that's just the way it is. And unfortunately, most people get caught on the wrong side of that when it all comes down. And we have a market that is rigged. It is fake. There's no price discovery mechanism behind any asset whatsoever because the Fed is still behind a rigging of the bond market along with other world central banks, and being that everything derives value from what's going on here in the bond markets around the world, how could the price action of anything be real? It's not. So we're in fantasy land.
So is the Fed trying to keep the market up, or are they trying to crash it? Because last time they raised the rates, this was prior to 2008, they raised the rates and everything started to fall apart and they had to, start lowering the rates. They're doing the same exact thing again, but I guess this time it's a little different because they have, $4.5 trillion on the books. They're trying to unwind that, and we have a huge amount of debt and, a lot of problems. So what are they trying to do? Are they trying to bring the system down, or they're just trying to keep it, on life support?
I think they're going to try to keep it on life support through the midterm elections, because the illusion must be kept real, that the economy is doing great and Trump is the greatest president in the history of the world. They need to keep this going, and after that, who knows if it will. Every time the market tries to do its one and only job, and I'm referring to the bond market right now, and the one and only job of all these markets is to determine fair value. Whenever the market tries to determine that fair value, it gets interrupted. And it's an amazing paradox. It really is, because we keep hearing out of their mouths, oh, we're going to raise rates 3 times. This is the Fed. Oh, no, maybe 4 times. But every time rates try to normalize or try to, determine a fair value, some mysterious entity gets in here and starts buying up those bonds to make sure rates stay down. But we have all these other issues going on here. We have, right now, a housing bubble, which is going to fall in some pressure now with those rates rising, the whole LIBOR issue. We have issues. We have coming at us from every different direction. It's just a matter of which one of these things is going to really break first. And then I think it's going to start a cascade of events that I do not believe that the central banks are going to be able to control. But for now, I think they want to try to keep it propped up. They want to through the midterms at least, and then we'll see how it plays out after that. So with that said, we just have to understand that this literally is like Disneyland. It's fantasy land. It's not real. It's not on the elemental chart. Nothing that we're seeing here with regard to any aspect of the market. There is no price discovery behind anything because the Fed and other world central banks are still controlling the markets. They are managed. There's no free market anymore.
So what about the dollar? I had a guest on Spotlight, and he says he thinks there's going to be one more rally in the dollar, and then the dollar is just going to crash, and it's going to crash and burn. What do you think? Where do you think the dollar is headed?
Well, where the dollar's been headed now for years, it's going low. It continues to lose value. They're gonna see. Look, the issue is the system. The system is debt based, as you well know. It needs to continually borrow cash from the future in greater and greater amounts just to sustain where we are. More cash has to be brought into existence, and they're going to keep printing. They're going to keep adding it to a digital screen, into oblivion. And every single time they do this, when they introduce more currency, that currency has to get value from someplace. So it steals a little fraction of value from the currency of every other bill that's in existence. So there's no doubt about it. This can't stop. So with that said, of course, We are marching down a path here where they are determined to kill the currencies. And what they're going to do, how they're going to fix it at one point, don't know. Don't I think like I think we spoke about this before. They're going to have to come out with a new something or other. I don't know what, but what I do know is it's not going to be in our best interest. We're all going to suffer for it, and it's a sad thing. It really is.
Now, going back many years, you talked about the economy crashing, and I just wanted to get your view on the economy today compared to years ago. Are we headed for the same type of crash where, maybe the credit markets are going to freeze up like in 2008, where we're going to need bailouts? Are we headed for the same exact type of crash that we were many years ago?
Worse, obviously. I think much, much worse because the distortions are much, much worse than they have ever been. And I've been saying for the longest time that we're going to end up in a situation where we're going to have credit markets freeze up again. There's going to be no lending. People will not have access to things. I mean, look, here's how I look at everything. I always try to assume the worst, because if it doesn't get to the worst, well, then I'm better off. But if we look at things from a possible worst case scenario and we try to adjust from that perspective and we try to, again, look through that prism, we could end up in a situation that would make 2008 look like a walk in the park, big time here, because the distortions are so much greater than they have ever been. The Federal Reserve has deliberately created an environment of risk. All these world central banks have done that to reinflate stock market bubbles around the world, to reinflate a housing bubble. The 2008 event was simply the markets trying to do their own one and only job, and that is to determine fair value. And what they've done instead now is inflate the mother of all bubbles, and that is the debt bubble. And without the ability to continue to borrow, once that bubble pops, we're going to end up with a resource issue. That means we will no longer be able to borrow anymore to sustain the current environment. So that has the potential to unfold on a biblical scale. When people are no longer able to access basic resources, well, just put two and two together and you can see where we have the potential to go. And, it comes down to this. Who will be held responsible? In my opinion, nobody. The politicians, no. Bankers, absolutely not. And they're gonna introduce something else and tell us all it's for our benefit. Oh, we have to do this because this is what the system has done. They're gonna blame the people, of course. Meanwhile, it's them that have twisted this system. I think in 2008, the sad thing here, when the credit markets froze up in 2008, they had to do something, in my opinion, and that was QE1. When they continued with QE2 and then Operation Twist and everything else that's going on till this day, that was when things really got crazy. They didn't need to do that. I think what they should have done, it's just in retrospect here, unfreeze those credit markets and let things work out for themselves. Let the free market work. Let it do its job. So once they would have got money flowing again, yeah, people got they got hurt, they lost money in their investment plans, but it would have been a real market. The market would be nowhere near where it is right now. The debt would be nowhere where it is right now. But someone over there went literally loony off the deep end and said, let's just do this. Let's just buy everything in sight. Let's buy all those bad mortgages. Let's reinflate a housing bubble. So now those mortgages will be worth something so we can dump them off onto the market. And then once we do that, we'll let the whole system crash again. Look, this is just a scheme of truly epic proportions to fleece the people. That's all it is. And so and this isn't nothing unique. This is going to be the worst. But this has happened over and over and over again in the past. And people think their current situation is like, oh, although this is unique in its own right that We've never seen a situation where world central banks have created a financial Frankenstein like this before. It's always the same. So people just need to get used to it. This is the cycle of the system, and it's engineered to work in that way.
Now, I mean, back in 2008, since you mentioned that, weren't they trying to help their friends and their buddies, like in AIG and all the banks and everything else? Weren't they doing it to help all those corporations so they personally wouldn't lose their investments?
Absolutely. Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, these were sacrificial lambs. That's all they were. They had to show the people something. Look what we did, everyone. Look what we did. Bear got absorbed by J.P. Morgan, Lehman, whatever happened over there. I mean, but they had to get one. They had to set that up like that. Look what happened. The Lehman Brothers been around for 100 and somewhat years. Oh, we let them fail. They're going to be the fall guy. But all that happened is all those assets that got absorbed by other companies. That's all that happened. And you're right. So they put on a show like they always do for the people. Look what we did. Oh, Wall Street paid for it. Oh, yeah, they did. Oh, of course they didn't. And look at it now. Look where we are now. Everything's being reinflated. And I'll tell you the biggest criminal act, in my view, with regard to talking about AIG and all this stuff, it's very sad. We all know what happened to people. Good friends of mine, happened to them. One of my very best friends, as a matter of fact, got wiped out, bought at the top of the housing bubble. And, people lost their homes. These were called toxic assets at that time, remember? Well, they're not so toxic anymore. They did succeed in reinflating a housing bubble. So now those toxic assets are actually valuable. So now they're going to sell these back onto the market for profit. And all those people that lost their homes were kicked down to the street, had their lives crushed. Well, you know what they get? They get nothing. So you're absolutely right. This was a scheme. They tried to, look, what isn't a scheme? It's all a scheme. And you just got to understand that's just the way it is. And there's nothing that we can do about it. And I mean absolutely zero. So what we do is we try to take the system, understand that it's fake, understand that it's rigged, and try to make it work for ourselves. I try to weaponize this market against them. That's why I sit here all day long and in front of my computer screen trading these markets. Most of the times I get it right. Sometimes I get it wrong. But that's just the way it is. I'm not going to let these people win. It's just not happening.
Do you think when we enter this collapse scenario, do you think the U.S. will remain the reserve currency of the world, or do you think it's going to change into a different type of currency?
They're going to do whatever they have to do to keep the Federal Reserve, I think, the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. That we fought wars to get here. We continue to fight wars to keep the dollar supported, to find reasons to borrow more. Budgets that make no sense are put in front of us, and we're told that, the president tells us, I had no choice. Bombings that we shouldn't be involved in other countries. This is all the mechanism to keep the dollar propped up. If there is a threat to the dollar, we will just enter into another war. More blood will be spilled. More innocent lives will be lost, unfortunately. But that's just the way it is. We have very little control. It's really the truth. It's a shame, but that's unfortunately the way the system is now. So we can either, succumb to it or make it work for us if we understand it. And I think that your listeners, yourself, obviously, has a good handle on this. And there's no way to prevent what's coming. And it's always the same story. It's not like this is any different, not like we haven't seen it before, although the magnitude of this is worse. Yeah, but it's always the same thing. So knowing that, and these are facts, anyone can, with access to the internet, if they were born yesterday, can look into the past cycles of how the market works, and you'll see there is a pattern here. And it just goes on for as far back as you want to go. It just doesn't stop.
Now, for those people who are looking to, protect themselves from this crash from what's going to happen. There's two sides now. There are some people that say, oh yeah, gold and silver, and a lot of the people that are in the cryptocurrency market saying, oh no, gold and silver,
Too.
you don't even go into the waste, go into cryptocurrency. What's your take on that?
Well, just before we got on air, I told you I was buying some more crypto here.
Right.
I own crypto, no doubt about it. I own gold, I own silver too. You can't be in any one thing. No one. I mean, I still believe the best places to be, and you know what I'm going to say is gold and silver, hard assets. They've proven to be sources of value, stores of value for thousands and thousands of years. Nothing is going to change that ever. So, bet against the debt, become your own central bank. These have been my themes since day one. I still stand by that. Regardless of what they do to it, they suppress it, they twist it. We have the London gold fix. It's an incredible thing that's even allowed to go on, but the price of gold is not real. It's fixed every day. There's no free market there. There's no price discovery mechanism whatsoever. They explode the debt greater and greater every single day. You can watch it on the debt clock. Meanwhile, the price of gold and silver remains relatively stationary. Imagine what the real price would be based in dollars here. It's just a crazy situation. So what do? You got to be diversified. You got to be into a bunch of things. That you can't ever put all your eggs in one basket. And but I still feel those are the best spots to be. Like I said, I own cryptos. I believe in them. I have pretty nice investments there. I got really nice investments in metals, and then I just trade these markets. That's what I do.
Why do you think the central banks, I'm just going to come back to this for a sec, why do you think they keep demonizing cryptocurrencies? I mean, you hear Christine Lagarde, you hear John Williams, the Atlanta Fed president, saying, oh, cryptocurrencies can never become a currency. It's impossible. It can never replace the fiat system. Criminals use it. Terrorists use it. Why are they harping on this so much?
Yeah, like criminals and terrorists don't use fiat currency, but because, look, it's decentralized. They can't control it. So without the control is what gives them power. They dictate to us what we use or what we have to use to transact. It's an incredible amount of power that they have by this mechanism. So they don't want to give that up. We've seen cryptos get whipsawed pretty darn bad as they've been trying to take advantage of that too. I'm more than certain we're going to see that again moving down the pike here. I just want Wall Street to keep their hands off of all this stuff. I warned everybody what was going to happen to Bitcoin when Wall Street got their hands on it. I told everyone, I nailed that almost to the day. I was telling people to, once the futures exchange on Bitcoin started, get out, sell it. I got laughed at and ridiculed. Well, let's see who's laughing now. I nailed that one, and everybody knows it. I think I'm the only one, actually. Maybe there's one other guy that I can think of who he's a futures trader as well. I don't trade futures, but I understand the market, and I knew what was going to happen. I think people have no conception whatsoever of the tentacles that Wall Street has. And so as long as Wall Street keeps their hands off of cryptos, I don't want to see any ETFs with regard to Bitcoin or anything else. I want it to stay out of their hands and we'll be okay. If we start seeing cryptos getting rigged by Wall Street, then it's going to be time to dump all of it big time, in my opinion. And I was right on Bitcoin, like I said, almost to the day.
So when you say rigged, you mean controlling the price, like they do with gold and silver, where they have a lot of paper contracts and they can dump a lot of paper contracts and bring the price of gold down. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, there are so many ways that they rig the Bitcoin futures markets, and I wrote articles about it. I told everyone exactly how they were going to do it, and very few people believed me. But those that did very, very well, and I was happy to hear from many people. Many people told me, Greg, thank you. I got to lock up my profit there, and everyone else is crying. And I mean literally. I had people writing to me, scores of people that got caught up at the hype right at the top of that bubble, crying, Greg, what do I do? I sold my car to buy Bitcoin at the top of the bubble. Now I have no way to get to work. I can't believe I fell into this whole thing. It's an insane situation. When people get hyped up and they get caught up into that, they make bad decisions. People were mortgaging their houses, taking out personal loans, credit cards, whatever they had to do to try to get into that super hype on Bitcoin. I'm not saying it's not going back up. It may very well might go back up there, but imagine how smart you would have felt. Those of you that would have sold when this guy's sitting right here talking to you told you to sell it, you didn't, and you would have rebought it back at the bottom. Sometimes I have to laugh at people, and now at least I get to do that because I took so much heat for what I had said was going to happen off of that. And when you can sit back and say you were right, well, you know what? Sometimes you got to do it, and I'm doing it right now.
So where do you think we're headed the rest of this year? I mean, The Economist magazine, they predicted that 2018 was going to be the year of like a transition into maybe a gold-backed currency. Do you think this year we're going to see a crash or something big happen where they have to make a transition into something else? I mean, I think there was a bill that was introduced where they're introducing the bill where it says that the dollar is going to be backed by gold. And I know Rand Paul has been trying to, get the Fed bill through. Where do you think we're headed the rest of this year?
The rest of this year is not happening this year. I don't know. Look, once we have a sound money system again, the central banks lose power. They don't want to do that. That was the whole entire reason for getting off of a gold standard and establishing the petrodollar. So they don't want it. They don't want a commodity-backed a currency. They don't want it. Again, it's got to be backed by the faith and credit of the bankrupt government that is issuing it through their central bank. It's garbage. It's nonsense. Again, it's not real. It's fantasy land. So no, I don't see that happening this year. In fact, I probably don't see it happening anytime. I think when this system ends, they're going to come up with something different that will benefit them. It's not going to benefit us. None of this is set up at all whatsoever to benefit you, me, or anybody who's listening to this. It's a rigged game across the board, and it'll always be that way. It will never change. In fact, it'll probably get a lot worse before it gets better. They're going to consolidate power. Once this thing really hits the fan, and it will, I look at it more as a correction to fair value than a real crash. And it's going to be epic when everything is realized for what. What's the value of debt that can never be paid back? What is the value of it? It's held around the world, and not only is it being held around the world, derivatives of it are in multiple forms and layers. There are layers upon layers upon layers of derivatives built on the back of the debt. So this thing is so big and so monstrous and so ugly that very few people, probably 1% of the people on this earth, really have an inkling of how bad it is. But what people see on the surface is nothing, because there are so many layers of this underneath that, again, it's hard for someone to get their head around, but it's really the truth. But look, the main thing is this. There's no utopia. There's nothing that's going to come out of this that's going to benefit anybody, unfortunately. So you got to do what you got to do now to figure out how to make the next correction to fair value, because that's all the market was trying to do in 2008, was correct to fair value. Was not allowed to do that. They reinflated the bubbles, and they continue to inflate them now. It won't stop until we hit another catastrophic event. But this one, again, has the potential to be much worse because the distortions are much worse. So, that's it. I think that people have to understand that this is the way it is. It's just not going to stop. It's a cycle that has been repeated over and over again throughout history. Recent history, too. I'm not talking about ancient history. I'm talking about modern times. And that's just the way it's going to unfold moving forward. There's no doubt about it.
Greg, thank you very much for being